Gonna start it.
Okay.
Hi, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us tonight for a presentation on the benefits of an urban forest. My name is Carla Costa, and I will be your moderator for tonight. So this is the second webinar of a four-part fall webinar series taking place at 7 p.m. on select weeknights in September, October, and November. These are hosted by the Durham Environmental Advisory Committee, otherwise known as DEAC, which is a council-appointed citizen committee of volunteers who are dedicated to promoting community outreach and stewardship through various activities and projects to support environmental awareness and appreciation in the region, including educational opportunities such as these. Now, before we turn it to our program for tonight, just a quick housekeeping note. So please use the Q&A function during the presentation for any questions you have for our presenter, and we'll make sure to get those answered to you. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for the evening. So tonight we have Brian Millward, and he is the Acting Community Programs Manager at LEAF and supports the Community Programs team to provide engaging and informative events and programming about the urban forest to LEAF volunteers and members of the public. He holds a Master's of Environmental and Life Sciences from Trent University and is passionate about connecting people to the natural world. Take it away, Brian.
Thank you so much, Carla, and thank you again for having us this evening. I'm so excited to be here to speak with all of you about the benefits of the urban forest. Before I jump into my slides, however, I would like to just acknowledge the land. And so where I am joining you all from here in Toronto virtually is on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is currently home to a diverse population of First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, which is signed by the Mississaugas of the Credit, as well as the Williams Treaties, which is signed by multiple Chippewa and Mississauga bands. I hope that as we're discussing the benefits of the urban forest today, that you take a few moments to really acknowledge and show gratitude to all of the ways this urban forest ecosystem supports us and the lives that we lead. And so for those of you who are unfamiliar with LEAF, we are a nonprofit organization that teaches people about trees and hopefully gets them excited about the urban forest. We plant native trees on private property. We educate people about how they can care for the trees in their communities. And a huge focus of all of the work that we do is really all about community engagement and getting people to help us get more native trees in the ground. And so for today's presentation, we are going to cover a few points. The first one is we're going to define what the urban forest actually is. We're going to then talk about the different benefits and values that the urban forest provides us. We're then going to go into several threats that our urban forest is currently facing. And finally, we'll touch upon what you can do as citizens, as community members, to really protect and enhance this urban forest ecosystem. And so the first big question we have to answer here is, what is the urban forest? And based on the name, most people think of trees in the city, which is part of the answer. But really, as I've mentioned already, we think about the urban forest at LEAF as a functioning ecosystem. So of course, it's going to include trees. It is a living, breathing forest, but it's so much more than just trees. You know, it's all the other plant life that exists in that ecosystem. It's the shrubs, it's the perennials, it's the flowers, it's the grasses, all of that plant life that is found within our cities. And they can be found, you know, in backyards, ravines, school grounds, parks, naturalized areas, anywhere that you find sort of that green infrastructure, that green life, that is a part of the urban forest. But then it goes so much further than just simply the plants that are in our cities. It's everything else that's interacting with each other. It's, you know, it's the soil, it's where those plants live. It's all of those microorganisms that feed and nourish that soil. It's all of the other wildlife, the mammals, the songbirds, the pollinators, the insects, all interacting with this plant life. And of course, it involves humans. The urban forest, we sort of, as humans, we introduce those urban components, that gray infrastructure. So things like roads, buildings, bridges, highways, that's all stuff that we've introduced to this ecosystem that all of this wildlife and plant life is interacting with. And because we play such a big role in sometimes disrupting this ecosystem with the types of gray infrastructure we introduce, it is our responsibility to be stewards to this ecosystem, to make sure that we are nurturing this wildlife and plant life that we share this space with. And so I just quickly wanted to touch upon sort of the state of Durham Region's urban forest. One thing that's a little, challenging when trying to define, the state of the urban forest within Durham is that Durham Region is made up of several municipalities, and each municipality is at a different place in terms of where their urban forest status is, as well as all of these municipalities are doing really great work to try to enrich, sometimes grow their urban forest, introduce more native species, and also more pollinator friendly habitats. And so you can see some figures here of just how many trees or how much canopy cover is across Durham Region. However, for the most part, all of these municipalities, like I said, are doing work to grow and enhance their urban forest. And also, across the board, when it comes to these municipalities in Durham Region, a lot of those trees, are facing very similar threats, which is what we're going to touch upon in just a few slides. And so now that we've sort of defined the urban forest and sort of, have an idea of how the Durham Region urban forest sort of works together with the different municipalities, the next question we want to ask ourselves is, what benefits do we gain as humans from a healthy, robust, thriving urban forest? And I'm sure you could list several ideas already. So I'm going to touch upon those benefits in the next few slides. And some of them might seem quite obvious, but some of them might also surprise you. And so usually the first thing that people say when we ask what sort of benefits do we get from a functioning, healthy, thriving urban forest, it's improved air quality. These trees, they suck up carbon dioxide and air pollutants, making our air cleaner. However, they also have these deep root systems which filter and clean our water sources. So they're removing water pollutants, and they also help when it comes to erosion control, as well as reducing stormwater runoff. So we see, decreases in flooding. And like I mentioned already, it also improves our soil quality. So I mentioned erosion, but these root systems also, they remediate contaminated soils as well. So they're not just holding on to that soil, but they're also cleaning it, and they're providing nutrients to that soil, making it richer. Another very obvious benefit to the urban forest that gets talked about a lot is combating climate change. So we all know that trees act as, big storage containers essentially for carbon dioxide. So they absorb carbon dioxide from the air and they hold onto it for a very long time, which can actually help us achieve many of our carbon mitigation goals. Something else though that trees do, which is an obvious thing, but people oftentimes forget, is they provide shade for us. And this shade actually helps cool down surface temperatures in cities. And so this high, surface temperature in city spaces is known as an urban heat island effect, where, all the asphalt, all the buildings, all of that dark material actually holds on to heat and makes the surface temperature warmer. And so simply by having more trees on street boulevards and in urban areas can actually decrease the surface temperature by 10%, so anywhere from 2 degrees to 4 degrees Celsius. Another thing that trees do though is their leaves will actually, they go through evaporation, so they release moisture in the evening, which as well will actually cool down urban areas, which is really exciting. Now, we all love trees because they do such an amazing job of providing incredible food sources and habitat for a wide range of wildlife. I love nothing more than going to my nearest park or even just walking around the neighborhood and seeing, and listening for all the songbirds or seeing which butterflies or bees are hovering around. And so this is something that we can all take part in, and seeing that urban wildlife. And so trees obviously provide habitat, nests, and shelter for many mammals and songbirds. But like I mentioned, trees can also provide shade, so they can actually cool down aquatic systems. If you've got lots of trees near a stream or riverbed, it'll actually cool down those those smaller ecosystems to actually make it more beneficial for aquatic life. Also, our urban forests here in Durham, as well as the GTA, act as a crucial stopping ground for migrating birds and butterflies that are making their long journeys either northward or southward. And as I mentioned, trees do an amazing job of providing ample amounts of food for a wide range of wildlife, specifically pollinators. People oftentimes think that they need to plant more perennial flower species to attract, bumblebees and butterflies to their backyard or front yard. However, trees also produce flowers, and they produce many more of them, oftentimes earlier on in the year, giving our pollinators that first important meal to get them started. Now, some people have actually done research on whether or not native tree species or non-native tree species do a better job of supporting local wildlife. So this gentleman, Eric Davies, actually did some studies, and he found that native tree species actually support a larger variety of urban wildlife. And it makes sense when you think about it. These native tree species that have been here for millennia upon millennia upon millennia, they've actually co-evolved with the local native wildlife. And so all of those relationships, whether it be finding, suitable habitat or food, those have all been, in place for such a long period of time that these animal species actually rely on native tree species more than non-native tree species, which is why the work that we do at LEAF, we make it a priority to make sure that we are promoting the importance of planting native tree species on properties. Now, this benefit is one that, some people don't think of necessarily right off the bat, and it is when we have more trees, we actually see a reduction in road maintenance needs. And the reason for that is when we have trees along street boulevards, that shade, like I mentioned before, it cools down the streets, which actually reduces cracking in the asphalt. So over time, you actually don't need to maintain or repair those roads as often. Also, having more trees, lining streets, it improves road safety. People calm down when they're driving through an area that has more trees. We see fewer accidents along streets that have trees on their boulevards, and people are less likely to lash out with road rage, which I think is something we all want to see more in this world. But what's also nice is trees actually act as a natural, sound barrier. And so they actually reduce noise as well in areas that have more traffic in them. And something that's being talked about more and more when it comes to trees in the urban forest are the health benefits that we gain. So something as simple as UV protection, being able to sit under the shade of a tree to protect yourself from, the sun's rays. But we also see other improvements when it comes to our physical and mental health. So having more trees in your neighborhood or community, it encourages you to get outside and be more active. Having more trees can also lead to lower rates of asthma in neighborhoods and communities. Folks are less likely to develop obesity, and people also mention that they have lower levels of stress and anxiety when they live in a community that has more trees in it. I always mess up this next fact, so please bear with me, folks. Folks who are in the hospital and actually have a view out of their window to a green space or to trees spend on average less time healing in hospitals simply by having a view of green space. Similarly, in workplaces and in schools, children or workers that have, access to a view that has trees and green space and biodiversity actually have improved attention. And so it can increase productivity in those cases. Now, some folks actually practice a technique called forest bathing. So I don't know if any of you have tried this before. Luckily, it doesn't actually involve a loofah or soap or anything like that. Essentially, what you do is you go out into nature. It can be a ravine, it can be a trail nearby your house. It could also just be like a small park. The reason why it's so versatile is because you're not looking to actually, do too much movement. It's all about slowing down and focusing on those small details in nature. So you don't need your pedometer. You're not going to try to get your heart rate going or get all your steps in. You're actually going to find a green space and you're going to slow down and take time to sort of take in every little detail, whether that be the sights, the sounds, the smells that you're, taking in that green space. And so folks who do this forest bathing, they actually find that it has a lot of calming effects on the nervous system. So we see positive effects on hormone levels that can benefit our physical health. And folks who practice forest bathing have stated that they see reductions in their stress, in their anger, in anxiety and depression. It also has been shown to improve people's sleeplessness. So this is an easy way that you can take in nature without having to keep up with all the hustle and bustle. And of course, there's also community benefits. And so folks who live in neighborhoods where there are lots of trees and ample amounts of green spaces feel an increased sense of connectivity and community with their neighbors, which is really important, I think. And also we see a correlation between greener neighborhoods and reduced vandalism and graffiti. So if there is beautiful trees and beautiful green spaces, people oftentimes really care for those spaces and they take pride in having them in their communities. And so they want to make sure that they're as beautiful as possible. Now, I understand that some people are persuaded by the dollars and the cents. So having trees on your property also does add value, like intrinsic value. So if you're someone who owns a business, having trees outside of your business will actually promote people or it'll incentivize people to stay a little bit longer and enjoy, all the loveliness of having trees in your, outside of your store. Also, shoppers have claimed that they're willing to spend up to 12% more in areas that have a higher tree canopy, just because they enjoy the experience of being there and shopping there, as opposed to an area that's just sort of all concrete and gray looking. Also, if you are someone who owns your own property, first off, congratulations. But secondly, you can also increase your property value. So having a larger tree or multiple larger trees on your property can add anywhere from 3 to 15% to your home's value. But there's an important note to make when I talk about this increase in value, which is, are all trees equal? Does size matter when it comes to how much value these trees are adding? And essentially, the rule of thumb is that the bigger the tree, the more leaves that tree is going to produce, which means all of those benefits that we spoke about earlier, the shade that it's producing, the amount of carbon it can suck from the air, the amount of air contaminants that it can purify, it's increasing that capacity to do that amazing work that trees do so well. And so unlike gray infrastructure that we introduced to the ecosystem, to the urban forest, that really does sort of depreciate, the value decreases over time. Trees do the exact opposite. The bigger the tree is, the older the tree is, the more it is doing for the urban forest. And so the bigger the tree, the more leaves you get and the more benefits we get to receive from them. And so when it comes to the actual dollars and cents, you can see the difference here. A newly planted tree will add about $1 to $9 in value to a property, whereas, the sort of general community benefits, it's around $1 to $9 it's providing to the community, whereas a fully matured tree, a 40-year-old mammoth, will be adding anywhere between almost $50 to over $100 to the community. And so this leads me to this study here that was done by an organization called GEO, Green Infrastructure Ontario, for those who want to look it up afterwards. Essentially, they went out because we know how much the great infrastructure costs us in our cities, in the urban forest, because we're constantly reminded every year that the municipal budgets come up. We know how much we're spending on roads. We know how much we're spending on highways to maintain this great infrastructure. But we oftentimes take this green infrastructure that actually appreciates over time for granted. We don't really have a monetary value on this green infrastructure. And so, like I said, this organization GEO, they did a report to sort of put that value, put that price tag on the urban forest across the GTA. And what they found was if we were to replace, which means for whatever reason, we lost our urban forest across the GTA, which would be 34.2 million trees. If we lost all of that and we had to replace the green infrastructure that was lost and all of the things it does to benefit our lives, it would cost us $14.2 billion, which is an amount of money that I simply can't conceive. I have no point of reference for what $14.2 billion looks like. But the reason I enjoy that statistic and that fact so much is that every time I see that number, it reminds me to not take this green infrastructure, to not take this urban forest for granted. And it reminds me, to really get active in protecting and enhancing that ecosystem. And so what's happening with our urban forest? Well, like I mentioned, there are many threats that our urban forest and the trees that live in our urban forest are facing. And so the first one and the most obvious one is it's dealing with a changing climate as well as a changing landscape. And so as climate change marches on, we can expect to see more storms as well as more severe storms. So this could be heavy rainfall, ice storms, longer and more frequent periods of drought, as well as just fluctuating temperatures and also changing seasons, like the start times and end times of seasons, which can really impact individual trees and the urban forest as a whole. Besides the changing climate that the urban forest is facing, it is still under a lot of development pressure when it comes to a growing and expanding human population. And so humans, obviously, we need space to live, to shop, to work, to get around. And so there's a lot of pressure to continue developing further and further into the GTA. And that's something we obviously cannot stop. But one thing we can do is we can advocate for the soil that these trees are going to be eventually planted in. I'm sure you've all seen, areas that are being newly developed. The machinery that they bring in is absolutely massive. And you can see the ways in which the soil is sometimes misused or mistreated when we are doing these sorts of development projects. And so all of that heavy machinery, all of that degradation, all of that compaction of having that machinery driving on top of that land over and over again, it makes the soil extremely difficult for trees to get established with their root system. So even, the hardiest of species will find it difficult to really get themselves established and thrive in those new settings. And so one thing that we can do as community members is we can advocate for the soil and make sure that developers are treating the soil kindly, especially the areas where they are planning to be planting trees once the roads or buildings have been completed. And obviously there are invasive species that our trees have to contest with. Obviously, like I mentioned, with the changing climate and with warmer weather, we are expecting these invasive species to actually survive for longer during the year. And as globalization also increases, the risk of introducing, more of these non-native invasive species will increase over time. And so these are just 3 examples of some very common invasive species we see across the GTA. So dog strangling vine is actually an invasive plant species that can cause a lot of harm to our native trees, as well as the LDD moth, which I know, especially here living in Toronto, we've been heavily impacted by this moth species this year. And then there's also the Asian longhorn beetle, which is another species that has caused harm in the GTA, specifically in Toronto, but fortunately, this year it was actually listed as eradicated from the city of Toronto, which was a really exciting update. And then there's this example. And for those of you who are unaware of what this insect is, it is emerald ash borer. This is an insect you can see in the top right photo. The green insect is the adult form, and then you have the larval or baby form on the right. And this invasive species does a huge number on our ash trees. Essentially, that larva eats away at a very thin layer of ash trees just under the bark. And you can actually see in the bottom right-hand corner there, the sorts of markings that are caused by, by the meals of the emerald ash borer larvae. Like I said, just under the bark of our ash trees. Now, this wouldn't be a big deal if it weren't for the fact that that thin layer just under the bark is a crucial part of the ash tree. It is actually the part of the tree that allows nutrients and water to pass up and down the trunk to the leaves and the branches, as well as back down to the roots. And so when the larvae chew away and eat away at that layer, it essentially asphyxiates the tree and can cause death easily within 2 years after infestation. And this emerald ash borer has been absolutely prolific, specifically in Toronto, and now getting further into the GTA. And so here's an example of just after 3 years what this invasive species can do. And so you can see a beautiful boulevard there on the left-hand side, and filled with gorgeous ash trees. And now 3 years later, all of that canopy cover is lost. And so unfortunately, we don't have a solution to the emerald ash borer. At this point, we're expecting the death count of ash trees within the GTA to be in the tens of millions, which is very unfortunate. But I think this is a good cautionary tale when it comes to what we can do to advocate and protect our urban forest ecosystem. Because if we had a planting plan where we didn't just plant a single species along a street, where we had diversity of native tree species in our cities, our urban forests could be more robust, more resilient to these types of threats, whether they be diseases or invasive species. And so with the work that we do at LEAF is we really advocate for people to not only plant native tree species, but a diverse variety of native tree species. So that way the whole urban forest can grow in its resiliency. And if that weren't enough that our urban trees are facing, there's so much more that they are up against. So things like in the top center there, not enough space, not enough soil really for those trees to do well. In the top right corner, you can see some damage caused probably by either a lawnmower or a weed whacker. Folks in the bottom left will also, plant trees too closely together and cause unnecessary competition, and also some poor growing if you plant them too closely together. In the top left corner, we have someone who, probably with the best of intentions, had a stake around their newly planted tree to help it maybe from gusts of wind, but unfortunately they forgot about it and left it there. And so now the tree has essentially girdled itself. It's grown around that stake, and much like the emerald ash borer, it's going to essentially asphyxiate it, which is a real shame. And then in the bottom right corner, we see someone who is probably doing some work on their home and completely disregarded the tree on their front yard. So first off, that fence is barely standing to begin with, but also that fence isn't nearly large enough. And that's because where all of that debris is, that mound of what looks like bricks and soil and all sorts of stuff, that's actually sitting on top of that tree's root system. And like I mentioned before, that compaction, that weight is essentially going to suffocate the roots. And so even though that tree might look healthy in the photo, in 2 to 3 years, it might be a very different story because it might not be able to bounce back from that root damage. And so I know that those are a lot of things that the urban forest is facing. I know it can seem overwhelming at times, but there is so much that you can do as an individual or as a member of a community group to really, advocate for the urban forest and do your part to protect and enhance it. And so the first thing you can do is if you, let's say, have a new tree in your backyard, or maybe you live near a busy street with boulevard trees, you can tend to those yourself. One of the best things you can do to really help those trees that are struggling is by watering them. And essentially you want to start your watering in early spring until about fall season. So, I would say now give it till about November. For those newly planted trees, you want to be watering them at least twice a week for the first 2 years after they've been planted. The reason why it's so important to water them for the first 2 years is because during those years, those very formative years, that tree is going to be establishing its root system. And so while you might not see a lot of growth vertically, you might not see a lot of branching or canopy growth, all of that energy is going to the root systems. And so really fostering those root systems and nurturing them is going to pay off in the long run. And so that's why it's so important to water them at least twice a week for those first 2 years. If you have a hose, you can simply just leave the hose on a slow trickle, or you could use like a soaker hose that will sort of like let the water dribble out, and you can just leave the hose by the base of the tree and let it just run on that slow trickle for about 20 to 30 minutes. You never want to actually, if you're watering your tree, you never actually want to get the tree itself wet. We don't want any moisture to collect on the trunk of the tree. It could actually promote wood rot. And so you really just want to make sure that you're soaking the ground that's around the tree. Again, nurturing those roots that are underneath the ground. And like I mentioned, for those young trees, those newly planted trees, you want to be providing them at least 6 gallons of water each time you're going out to plant them. So an easy way to do that is just, 3 large watering cans will do the trick. And like I mentioned, making sure that you are watering them, around the base of the tree and not actually getting the tree itself wet. Now, if you do have, a mature tree on your property or just a mature tree that you want to support, if you're watering them, you actually want to water them as far as the canopy reaches. So you want to look up, you want to look to see how far these branches are reaching, and that's actually how much area you want to water. Because like I said, as the trees grow, those roots are actually going to reach out further than the canopy. And so making sure that you're getting all of that space nicely watered rather than just, up close to the base or the trunk of that tree. Another great thing you can do to support the trees in your community is by giving them mulch. You can easily purchase mulch at really any garden center. I would recommend purchasing organic mulch, and essentially these are, broken down organic materials and wood chips that will essentially nourish and provide nutrients to these newly planted trees. But mulch does so much more than provide nutrients. It actually regulates the temperature of the soil just above the root systems. And so during the heat waves in the summer, it actually will keep the roots cool and do the opposite in the winter. So as temperatures begin to drop, it'll sort of insulate and keep those roots nice and warm. Mulch also holds on to moisture. And so if you're someone who can't water your tree regularly, making sure that you've got a nice, beautiful mulch ring and then soaking it with water, that water will eventually percolate down and again, sort of nourish that root system. Mulch also acts as a natural weed suppressant. So any invasive species or really any other plants that you don't want to get too close to the tree and compete for those resources, that water and those nutrients, that mulch is actually going to provide sort of a natural barrier to those other plant species. And it also provides sort of a protective space around the tree for humans as well. It's usually a good indicator of how close someone can get with their lawnmower or their weed whacker. So you're probably also preventing any, unnecessary interactions with humans as well by just having that nice mulch ring. Now, this is something I've said the mulch ring already, but this is something I need to reiterate, is that there is a correct way to mulch a tree and there is a very incorrect way. And for whatever reason, it seems like everyone was taught that the mulch volcano on the right-hand side is the correct way, and that is completely wrong. What you want to aim for is a mulch donut, a nice large ring that goes around the tree, and you actually don't want any of the mulch to touch the base of the tree. The reason that is like I mentioned a slide before, mulch holds on to moisture. It does it so well. But if you have mulch in this volcano, stacked up and up against the base of the tree, that moisture is going to promote wood rot. You're actually doing more harm than good for your newly planted tree. And so what you want to do is leave at least 6 inches away from the base of your tree. And like I said, you want to create a nice, gorgeous mulch donut around your tree. So that way, like I said, you're helping the roots of that newly planted tree to really establish themselves and thrive in their new home. And you also want to do your best to really protect those newly planted trees or the trees in your community against all of those threats that I mentioned. So, trees are up against chemical damage. So doing your best to try to mitigate any sort of like salt contamination, obviously not using any pesticides in your yard, and also steering clear from chemical fertilizers. Like I said, that mulch will do a great job of providing additional nutrients to help your tree thrive in its new home. But you also want to be wary of physical damage. So making sure that you're not accidentally cutting any roots with any sort of equipment like a weed whacker or a lawnmower. As I mentioned, keeping like heavy equipment or machinery away from the base of the tree so that way you're not compacting the soil down. You also want to make sure, like I mentioned before, that you're not doing improper staking so that you're not putting a stake on a tree that really doesn't need it, or putting a stake on a tree and then forgetting it and causing that tree to get girdled essentially. And you also want to sort of steer clear from improper pruning. So if you aren't familiar with how to prune properly, I would probably, err on the side of caution, and you can always reach out to a certified arborist and get their help and expertise on those sorts of scenarios. And obviously, as I mentioned a few times now, lawnmowers and weed whackers can cause physical damage to the bases of your trees that could be permanent damage. And so please make sure that you're steering clear from your trees when you're doing that other sort of yard work. Now, there are other ways that you can get involved in protecting and enhancing the urban forest through joining, community groups or participating in programs like the ones that LEAF offers. And so I wanted to sort of, quickly jump into some of the many ways you can get involved with our organization and the programs that we run, because we're very excited that this year we actually expanded our services into Durham Region. And so it's great that now folks in Durham can take part in our many opportunities. And so the first thing that you can do is, like I said, if you've got a backyard that needs a tree, we would love for you to participate in our backyard tree planting program. The reason this is so important is because most of the plantable space in our cities is on private property, and also backyards are sort of the perfect place for a new tree because they're sheltered from many of those threats that I mentioned earlier when it comes to, the urban forest system. And so when you do participate in our program, it is all about getting the right tree in the right place. We only provide native tree species because that's just a very important tenet of the work that we do. And as I mentioned before, a lot of our focus is on education and care. We don't just want to get the tree in your backyard. We want to make sure that it is going to have a beautiful, thriving life and reach full maturity. And the way we can ensure that is teaching, homeowners on how they can properly care for those trees. Now, there are some different options. I'm going to go through these very quickly. The first is a full service option. Essentially, this involves a 30-minute site consultation with a leaf arborist. So we would actually come to your home and assess the sort of conditions, sun conditions, soil conditions of your property, and then recommend you a list of native tree species that would do perfectly in that space. Another important factor of the full service program is that we would deliver the trees to your property as well as plant them for you and do the mulching. However, if you are someone who, you're feeling up to it yourself, you want to put that tree in the ground yourself, we do have a do-it-yourself option. So unlike the full service program where we would come to your house and go through that site consultation in person, this involves a 30-minute virtual consultation with, again, a certified leaf arborist. We would, again, then site your property, provide you a list of native tree species that would do great in your space, and we would deliver those trees to your property. However, it is your responsibility as the property owner to actually plant them in the ground. So if you're feeling up to it, you're more than welcome to take part in this do-it-yourself program. And also we have a multi-unit and businesses option. So if you're someone who lives in an apartment building or a condominium, or you've got a business that you would like to have trees around on that property, you're more than welcome to participate in this iteration of our backyard tree planting program. Again, it sort of provides, it involves, two consultations. So first a virtual consultation and then an on-site in-person consultation with a leaf arborist. And much like the full service program, we would deliver those trees as well as plant them for you and provide the mulch. Now, what's exciting about all these opportunities is that they are all subsidized by the municipalities that we partner with. And so these values that you see here, as well as on our website, if you wanted to look further into it, they are a subsidized value. So oftentimes the actual cost for our services would be about double the prices that you see here, but we have partnerships with our amazing municipalities and they help make the cost more affordable for folks. Now, you might be saying, Brian, I don't have any space for a tree in my backyard. What else can I do? Well, you can also get shrubs. We also offer cedars and we offer pawpaw trees through our backyard tree planting program. And so you could purchase an individual shrub or you could select, a shrub bundle. So we have different themes, whether you're looking to support native bee populations, songbirds, maybe you have a small yard, or maybe you're looking for more privacy, especially now with most people working from home. The neighbors are a bit nosier than they were before. So maybe you're looking for a bit of privacy as well. So you could also do one of those shrub bundles. And we have our pawpaws as well, which are a very popular tree species that actually produce a tropical fruit. I know. A native tree in Ontario producing a tropical fruit. It's true. I've heard that the taste of a pawpaw fruit is sort of in between like an apple and a banana, which to me sounds wild, and I can't wait. I still haven't had my first taste of one yet, but I can't wait to try it. Now, you might also be saying, Brian, well, I don't even have space for a shrub. Don't worry, we also offer native garden kits. And so these kits come with a selection, a variety of native perennial species. So we have small kits and large kits depending on the size of your outdoor space. And again, they come in themes. So these could be, maybe you're promoting butterflies in your garden, maybe you want to attract more songbirds or native bees to your garden, or maybe you have an area that is a bit more shaded. We have species of perennials that will do great in all of those settings. And so all of those backyard tree planting programs, if you're interested in getting, involved and, requesting to take part in that program, please feel free to go to our website. It's at the bottom of all of these slides, www.yourleaf.org. Easiest way to find all of that information. However, you could also volunteer with LEAF. So maybe you don't have that space, but you still want to get involved with the work that we do. We have many opportunities, usually that take place from about spring to fall. Obviously winter, things slow down when it comes to, planting trees. But there are loads of ways to get involved in your community through LEAF and advocate for the urban forest. So you could join one of our outreach teams. We also do have some community gardens in the city of Toronto, not yet in Durham, but if you're willing to commute, you could participate in those as well. But we also run many different events throughout the GTA, and we're always looking for volunteers to assist us with those. And so the way you become a volunteer is you would go through our application form on our website. You would then attend one of our volunteer orientations, and then you would get an email just like this in the middle here, outlining all of the different opportunities we have going on for our volunteers throughout the year. And you could sign up for whichever opportunity interests you or the one that is most convenient or works best with your schedule. Now, right now, we have loads of special events, tree tours, and presentations that you could actually get involved with, that you can, attend. Some of the ones that I wanted to mention to you specifically, since they're right around the corner and they're in Durham, is we're actually hosting a tree tour, a virtual tree tour of Oshawa's Botanical Gardens. And so that's going to be taking place on October 13th. And so if you're interested in attending that and learning more about, how to identify trees in Oshawa, you can register for that through our website on our events page. But we also have a couple of special events. I'm so excited to be doing this for the first time in Durham. We have 2 community planting events taking place on Saturday, October 16th and Sunday, October 17th. The Saturday event is going to be taking place in Oshawa, and the Sunday event is going to be taking place in Whitby. And so we're really excited to have community members come out to these planting sites and help us get some native trees and shrubs in the ground in Durham Region. It'll be really exciting. And again, you can register for those events by going to our website and clicking on the events page. Now, there is also this campaign that I wanted to mention to you because it is a virtual campaign. It is our hashtag Backyard Biodiversity campaign. And so if you were to follow us on all of our social media platforms, whether that be Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, you can help us by sharing this content because we really do want to educate the general public about how important native trees and native plants are to really supporting all biodiversity that exists within our cities. And so we also want to encourage people through this campaign to really get outside and engage with the nature that is, in their own backyards. And of course, the last thing you can do is you can advocate and you can protect the trees in your community. And so do your part. Keep an eye out for those trees that are in your neighborhood. See if they look particularly stressed or if they need some additional support. As I mentioned earlier, you can provide water and mulch where appropriate to those trees to really help them thrive in their urban homes. You can also share resources to neighbors and fellow community members of how they can properly care for the trees that are on their property. And you can obviously work with groups or like-minded individuals like LEAF to correct improper tree care. And so getting that word out there and really, encouraging people to really show respect for the trees in their neighborhood and make sure that they're caring for them properly. And so with all that being said, I know we covered a lot in one evening together, and I'm curious to know if there's any questions that people have either about the urban forest, what sort of things are going on in the urban forest, or if you're curious about how you can get more involved with advocating for the urban forest and protecting it through LEAF. But again, I just want to say thank you to Carla, to DIAC for having us here tonight, and I really hope that you all enjoyed my presentation.
Thank you so much, Brian. That was so informative, and I actually learned so much from hearing you speak, and your passion about, the forestry and the environment. It just really comes through, and thank you so much for spending time with us this evening to talk to us about, everything that you know. And I just can't wait to get my hands on a pawpaw fruit. Like, that sounds amazing. Where can I get one?
It's evaded me for years. Like, folks will actually go on like pawpaw, like people will try to find them because it's just such an interesting fruit. And you would never think that a fruit like that exists naturally in the GTA. It's absolutely wild.
Right. Yes. Well, we did have one question come in, and it touches on a little bit around opportunities to get involved. So we have a question about our, if there are any job opportunities at LEAF.
Oh, for sure. As of now, I don't believe so, just at this particular moment. However, if you were to go to our website, as you see on the slide, it's again www.yourleaf.org. Make sure I get all the W's in there. If you go to the About Us tab, there is an employment opportunities page there. And so there usually are, many opportunities during like the busier times of year at LEAF. Usually that happens at the spring or the fall, because that's oftentimes when we're actually getting trees and shrubs in the ground. So I would definitely encourage folks, if you're interested in sort of, getting more involved when it comes to employment with LEAF, definitely check out that page at those times.
Thank you so much. So there were no other questions that came in, but I'd just like to open it up to anybody. If anyone has any questions they'd like to ask a little bit later, feel free to reach out to DIAC. DIAC's email is on their website, and or through Eventbrite. You can get a hold of us, and we'll be happy to get the responses to you. Also, there will be a recording of this presentation available online. So if you would like to go back and learn again about all those great details that we learned today, it'll be available for you online. And I'm sure accessing anybody from LEAF would be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have.
For sure. Can I just make one quick edit, Carla, on something that I said?
Yeah.
One thing that I just want to make clear to everyone is that while we have expanded into Durham Region this year, we haven't yet partnered up with all of the municipalities within Durham Region. And so we do have partnerships with many of those municipalities, but if you were looking to get involved with our backyard tree planting program, I would encourage you to double check our website to make sure that you are a resident in one of those municipalities where we're offering that service. So I just want to be really clear about that.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you so much again, and I hope that you and everybody who was able to join us today has a great night.